Happy Sunday, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. I am Jeremy Birmingham. This is Talking Stuff. I'll be joined momentarily by my co-host, Andrew Ellis. We're going to talk about the commitment of Maxwell Riley and what it means for the Buckeyes and a whole lot more as Ohio State gets ready to kick off spring practice. And in doing so, we'll return a lot of big-time players to Columbus for recruiting visits. We'll also break down some of those, the most important ones of the week, and a whole lot more on this episode of Talking Stuff. Andrew Ellis joins us now. Andrew, happy Sunday. Welcome to the show. It's been a productive week for Ohio State, I guess. It's been a productive week for everybody, not named the Cincinnati Bengals, who have just done absolutely nothing as the NFL allowed free agency to start this week. And the Bengals, I guess, I'm gonna try to play the role of optimist. And I know that they're working on trying to get the deals done for T and Jamar Chase. And there's some conversation that maybe they're even going to try to figure things out with Trey Hendrickson. I don't know. My plans about buying Bengals season tickets are entirely contingent on those three guys returning, because I will not pay a dime to Mike Brown next year if one of them. So I hope he's listening.
Yeah, he might be. You never know. I'm not going to believe the rumors of them adding anyone or signing anyone until it actually happens. And even if they do sign those guys, their free agency grade's probably sitting at like a D right now. So maybe they can add an offensive lineman or two here in the coming days, but my confidence is very low.
Yeah, or anybody on defense would be great. Anyway, talking about adding people, nobody wants to hear about us bitch about the Bengals, so let's try to avoid that. We'll talk first and foremost about Maxwell Riley. He committed to Ohio State last weekend. I think it was Monday night. The Buckeyes were in a battle back and forth with Clemson for quite a while for the Avon Lake 6'5", 280-pound offensive tackle for the Shoremen. He's probably going to be an interior guy for the Buckeyes, so he could play all five spots. He's also a guy that maybe isn't done growing. His dad is like 6'8", and Max is certainly not probably done growing, considering he's 16 years old and he's 6'4", 280. So really a polished player, a guy that is, of all of the players that we've talked about in the state of Ohio, tons of talk about Adam Guthrie and Sam Greer and all the other guys that people want the Buckeyes to offer. But of them all, Max was offered by Ohio State almost 2 years ago. He is by far the most polished of the group, and maybe not physically ready for college because he is a little bit lighter. But as far as the technical side of the game, he is advanced well beyond where the rest of those guys in the state are. And he's an interesting kid. He did not really want to make a big to-do about his commitment. It came not way earlier, but about 3 weeks earlier than anybody expected. He was supposed to be at Clemson next weekend, and then he was going to come back to Ohio State over the April 1st weekend to take one last look at each school. And after the timing of it, I think, is the funny part, right, Andrew? Like when because I know you're the pessimist on this show, but that commitment for Max Riley came on Monday night, and Clemson had just reeled off like 8 commitments in 4 days. And I assume for some people, when they saw the Hayes Fawcett tweet notification and it said Maxwell Riley commits to, I would have bet that there was at least a small percentage of Ohio State fans or a part of your brain that was worried it was going to be Clemson based on everything that we'd seen, because I believe there was a rash of crystal balls for Clemson the day before, right?
Yeah, there were. And I absolutely was one of those people who saw the tweet and just assumed it was going to say Clemson there. Very happy it wasn't. That's just, it's a huge win. I know he doesn't have like that true, pure tackle body, but he might be the best or the most college ready offensive lineman in the state right now. Clemson's kind of been a thorn in Ohio State's side of late. We're going to talk about that more here in a second, but just a big win for Tyler Bowen. I think this recruitment definitely went back and forth, Justin Fry's departure, and then nobody really knows what Tyler Bowen's going to do as far as, recruiting offensive linemen, since he hasn't really had to do that in a while, I guess, at Virginia Tech. But really big win, and I guess the first of maybe 3 in-state offensive linemen, maybe more. Who knows? I guess we'll find out.
Yeah. Again, I think I'm not sure where the discussion or the impetus was for those crystal balls to Clemson. Because again, at that point, Max had been very clear. He wanted to take visits to both schools again. I don't know if maybe there was a sense that Clemson was filling up on the offensive line, and maybe they were trying to push a little bit to put a little pressure on Max to say, hey, if you don't decide now, you might not have a spot. Not to say that invalidates or takes away from the importance of him for Ohio State, because he certainly is vital for what Tyler Bowen needed to do in this class. But when you look at what Clemson had done over the course of a few days, they had gotten a commitment from Adam Guthrie from Ohio. We'll talk about him in a second. Chancellor Barclay, an offensive lineman from Florida, Grant Wise from Florida, and then they had Braden Wilms already. So they had 4 guys committed in the offensive line room. My sense is that Clemson probably tried to push and say, hey, if you want this spot, it's yours, believing that they had done enough and overcome Ohio State because of the loss of Justin Fry to win that fight. And I'm not sure. I think maybe that backfired on Clemson, if I have to just guess what happened.
Yeah, it seems like Clemson does that from time to time. I know they also, I think last weekend, hosted that, I don't know anything about him, but some kid named Cannon Pickett, who's also a Miami legacy, and most just thought he was a lock to Miami. And then I believe he visited Clemson, and then there was some crystal ball forecast activity for him to commit to Clemson. And then I did notice some of those picks have already been flipped back to Miami. So maybe Clemson just tells him, you're in line for this last spot, take it now, or else don't take it at all. But again, he was on campus last weekend. Riley wasn't, so that's a different scenario. But yeah, I don't know. Clemson's different.
Yeah, Cannon Pickett is the brother of Booker Pickett and the nephew of former Ohio State defensive tackle Ryan Pickett. He visited Ohio State a couple times, but either way, whatever caused it to happen on the timeline it did for Ohio State, it's pretty huge. I talked to Max a little bit throughout the week and just trying to get his sense of what it came down to, and he just told me that it came down to the culture and the people. No matter what happens, Ohio State football is Ohio State football, and I think that understanding that losing coaches, losing games, whatever, Ohio State is always going to be in the conversation as one of the best in the country. And that's a kid who grew up dreaming of playing between Ohio State. And he said that basically he sat down with his family and decided, he wanted to get a decision made. And again, my read is probably that Clemson was trying to strong arm him into an early decision. And in doing so, probably led to him saying, the heart was always with Ohio State. And I think that was obvious. He will be back on campus on Monday recruiting for Ohio State. We'll talk a little bit more about those visitors coming up. But there is a big win for Ohio State over Clemson and offensive line coach Matt Luke. And I brought up Adam Guthrie. He ended up committing to Clemson. I think it was 24 hours before Max Riley. And then Caden Gephardt, the safety from Olentangy in Columbus, he committed to Clemson on Monday afternoon. It was kind of funny. I was writing a story about the safety prospects who Ohio State are still courting, and I was reaching out to a source, and I had seen a tweet from Adam Guthrie saying big news coming at noon or whatever on Monday. And I just had similar feeling to what you had when it came to Max Riley, except my gut was right. So I asked people, I said, hey, is this probably going to be Caden Gephardt? Because I'm writing about the safeties right now, and I want to make sure I don't include him on this list if he commits. And so I actually published the list, I think like 3 minutes before Clemson received the commitment, or before the commitment became public. So Caden Gephardt is an interesting player. Ohio State really liked him. He's maybe a bigger safety linebacker hybrid type. And I think Ohio State is competing its interest between what they were looking for with Caden Gephardt, but then a player like Simeon Caldwell from Jacksonville in the class of 2026 who could maybe outgrow the safety position that he's listed at right now. So Guthrie, like a lot of upside, I think, a lot of really real upside there for an offensive tackle, but he's extremely raw. And we've talked about him a lot on the show, so I'm not going to relitigate everything that we've ever said, but I think that's a loss that is more important 4 years from now than it is right now, Andrew. And I wonder if your take, because he has to go out and develop into what he could be athletically, because he's not there yet. To me, and I say this as somebody who wanted Ohio State to offer him and thought Ohio State should offer him and try to develop him themselves, I don't think he's an Ohio State caliber player yet. And I think that he's probably 3 years away from being that. And it's not a knock on him because I think he's got all the upside in the world. And I was on this show 6 months ago saying you need to offer this kid because kids like him don't grow on trees, and especially in Ohio. So it's just a reminder to me of how changed the world of college football is, because this is an in-state kid who had an offer from Ohio State in 5-10 years ago, would not have batted an eye at the idea of coming to Ohio State and developing or taking a couple of years. But Ohio State was not making a big money play with NIL for Adam Guthrie. Again, that's something we've talked about a lot about, hey, do they need to be more aggressive when it comes to in-state kids? But Guthrie commits to Clemson and is off the board for the Buckeyes. And I don't know that it'll end up hurting Ohio State right now, but maybe 4 years from now when he's a junior all ACC type player at Clemson, we'll look back and go, oh man, how'd you let this kid leave the state? But like today, it doesn't feel like it's that big of a deal.
Yeah, it's funny how, he commits to Clemson and the fan base collectively says, here we go again with offensive line recruiting. And then of course you get the good news from Max Riley shortly thereafter. With Guthrie, he's 6'7". So, and I know playing tackle isn't just about how tall you are. I know it's about like footwork and stuff, but just from a measurable perspective, I mean, he looks like a tackle based on just his height and his weight, I guess. But the level of competition is not the best. But you need those guys you don't expect an offensive lineman to come in and be ready right away or even in year 2 necessarily. So I think if you're an Ohio State fan and you miss him and you get Riley and you're obviously still in it for a few other in-state guys we're going to talk about, I think things are fine where they're at right now, especially when you consider you're going through a coaching change at the position. So I'm okay with that. You're muted, bud.
It's not also just the in-state kids that you're looking at there's a line of players there, right? There's obviously Sam Greer at the top of the list because he is in-state, but he's also 6'8", 320 pounds. Like he's similar, but then you have the big swings you want to take for guys like Jackson Cantwell, who will visit Ohio State next weekend, or Felix Ojo from Texas, who's going to be back in town 3 weeks from now. And I know like the fan base is already like hyperventilating because people just assume there's no way Ohio State's going to win any of those fights. But I do think that we're in a position where we're going to see Ohio State. Maybe it's because it's year 1 of Tyler Bowen. I don't know. Maybe it's a commitment that Ryan Day made to him. Say, hey, we're going to put you in position to win these fights. I don't know. I don't know that for a fact, but I feel like it seems to me, just looking at the way that Tyler Bowen handled things in the first 3.5 weeks of being on campus, like there was a much more aggressive swing for those top of the line national players than I would have anticipated. And I know he was having regular relationship building conversations with Adam Guthrie, as well as Sam Greer and stuff like that. But like I was told that there's like 25 players in the class of 2026 right now that Tyler Bowen's having daily conversations with. So like that list is expanded quite a bit. And if we're going to, go back to the Justin Fry era and the things that we would complain about or the things that people would have criticism about, like it seems like Tyler Bowen has taken that criticism to heart and really opened up the recruiting board for Ohio State. And when you do that, it does mean that some of the in-state guys might fall by the wayside. Now, again, because 10 years ago, that was fine because you could call that guy in September and say, hey man, now it's your turn. Are you ready to go? And player X would say, hell yeah, I am. I've always wanted to be a Buckeye. I don't know that that's the case anymore when you have money attached to these decisions. So it is this balancing act for Tyler Bowen and the Buckeyes, but I don't think that losing Guthrie is that big of a deal right now. I actually think that losing Caden Gephardt is a bigger deal because who is that safety, Nolan, who was at Clemson, who was the big hitter there? Was he Nolan Turner? Was that his name?
Wasn't he like a walk-on that ended up being good? I can't remember. I know who you're talking about, but I can't.
Yeah. He played safety at Clemson. He was really good, right? Like he's that type of player in their defense, and that's what I think Clemson is pitching to Caden Gephardt. Like you're the enforcer, you're the guy that's going to come downhill and be the bruiser. Who really deserves credit, I think, in the Caden Gephardt recruitment is Tom Allen, who was recruiting him when he was the defensive coordinator, head coach at Indiana, and then when he was the defensive coordinator at Penn State, and then when he went to Clemson, immediately got on the phone with Caden and made sure that he knew he wanted him there. So, like, that's how you win that type of relationship. McArary had been involved in the last few months and had started to really increase the amount of conversation between Ohio State and Gephardt. But there had not been any opportunity yet or any desire yet or impetus yet for Ohio State to really build the relationship with Ryan Day and Caden Gephardt. And I think that Caden probably just felt like that was not going to happen and he was not going to be prioritized by Ohio State. He was supposed to be on campus with the Buckeyes tomorrow, March 17th, for the first practice of the spring, but he will not be as he's committed to Clemson. And again, I think Clemson does a really nice job of making sure kids who are on the fence of committing to one place or another jump into the pool when they're on campus at Clemson and then immediately shut down their visits because Dabo doesn't let the kids take visits elsewhere, from what I understand. So I think he does a nice job of doing that and saying, hey, we wanted you the whole time. Ohio State hasn't shown you that. Why not just jump in here? And it's not always about money. It's not like that type of situation. I think it's just a reality of the new world of recruiting where Clemson, South Carolina fans and Clemson fans complain all the time about how Ohio has taken over Hilton Head and Myrtle Beach and all that stuff. And so I guess it's turnabout as fair play that Clemson's making a push in the state of Ohio to get some of the players because they know that the guys in Ohio that Ohio State recruits are the right types of people.
Right. And you mentioned the kid earlier, but remind me, who was the other name that we said, Gephardt or the other kid that's down to Notre Dame and Ohio State related to Tim Walton? What's the name again?
Simeon Caldwell, who is at this point from the Bowl School in Jacksonville, 6'3", 190 pounds. He's a safety right now, but I think that you could very easily see him grow into that 6'3", 215 range by the time he's in college. And the belief on the Notre Dame side, which is very rare for this to happen, the Notre Dame folks seem to think that Ohio State is the favorite. Normally Notre Dame is pretty confident that they're going to get everyone, but in this case, they seem to be believers that Simeon Caldwell is trending more toward Ohio State. He's going to visit, I think, 3 times between now and June. It's an either or situation at times when it comes to recruiting, and I think Ohio State is clearly feeling more comfortable putting its eggs in the Simeon Caldwell basket at this point. And then you look back 3 years from now and you ask yourself, did you make the right decision? It's tough. Life is tough.
Yeah. You never know. I didn't realize that Ohio State was in it so much with Caldwell until news came out last week or whenever that they were in the top 2 and likely the favorite. And then I texted you about him and Gephardt, and you said that you thought it would end up being one or the other. And I sort of mentioned that on the forum and got a little bit of pushback on that as far as like, well, why would that be? And I assume the answer is just Ohio State views them as similar prospects down the road. So
yeah, it's not my decision. I'm just saying, right. What I've heard is that when you look at the body types, when you look at who they are currently, Gephardt is 6'2", 200 pounds. Caldwell is 6'3", 195, and they think he's going to end up growing into a 6'3", 220 pound linebacker / safety hybrid, which is where they were recruiting Gephardt. So, what you might get with Simeon Caldwell is a touch more twitch. He's a little bit more athletic off the rip, and Gephardt might be more comfortable being an inside of the box tackler type that, Lathan Ransom / any other safety hybrid combo in the country. So it's not really a matter of like preference. It's a matter of where the relationship is. And again, Tim Walton being related to Simeon Caldwell, I think it plays a role in this. It's not like the be all end all, as we saw in the KJ, the KJ Bolden recruitment. Like being related doesn't guarantee that someone's going to win the battle, but it certainly seems like Ohio State is prioritizing Simeon Caldwell out of these 2, and 3 visits coming up for him should hopefully be enough to seal the deal for the Buckeyes. He's visiting, I think, March 29th, April 12th, and then his official visit in June. But visits do start everywhere for Ohio State and for everyone for the Buckeyes on Monday. Some of them have already gotten into town. Micah Champ Smith, the 4-star offensive tackle from Florida, who I did not even mention when we're talking about Jackson Cantwell and Felix Ojo and these other big-time national names. He's already arrived on campus for the Buckeyes. And Andrew, when last we did this show about 2 weeks ago, and again, we're going to try to be more consistent, especially during the high volume recruiting periods that we're entering into. It is challenging when I'm not here a lot to have it set up. But Wednesday night, we have Ohio State practice in the morning. I'll be home in the evening, so we should have an update on the weekend visitors, which will include Jackson Cantwell. But for today, we're going to talk about Ohio State and who we're expecting, who we're looking forward to seeing on Monday and Wednesday of this week, because that is the first 2 days that Ohio State has eschewed recruiting visitors for the past 3 weeks when they could have had them on campus for 2.5 weeks. And the reason they do that is because they want these guys to see Tyler Bowen coaching in person. They want these defensive players to see Matt Patricia in person. They want the quarterbacks to see Billy Fessler in person and see how they coach and not just sitting there in a meeting room. So we're going to run down this list here of what I think are the key names for Monday and Wednesday. If you're watching this, I apologize. It looks like I doubled up on Bo Bentley on March 29th. So there's a slight shadow on his name that shouldn't be there. And it's making me feel anxiety, but it's irrelevant. The list starts with Sam Grier for Monday, and I think that's for good reason. Andrew, 6'8", 320 pounds, Akron Hoban. Sam Grier, I think people on the internet saw a clip, tweets / highlights of him playing basketball in the last few days. And I don't know why, but it seems like that video clip opened up some eyes to people like, oh my gosh, this dude might be like elite when it all is said and done. He's like a baby bear, like he's got huge paws and he can inadvertently, like, did you watch the clip I'm talking about? Like at the end of the clip, he like pushes a guy and the dude goes flying. And I'm like, man, I don't know that I'd put that on my basketball highlights, but I guess at the same time, like it is a reminder that he's playing basketball for fun. But what you notice on the basketball clips is he is really, really good with his feet. And we have been waiting to see him emerge as a big time national recruit football wise. But when you look at the size, when you look at the footwork, when you look at the strength for a kid who's really not ever done much to get stronger, like there is a mountain of upside for Sam Grier, and he's going to be priority one for Ohio State on Monday. Max Riley will be there to help recruit him and Champ Smith, but it's really about Sam Grier and Tyler Bowen and Ryan Day spending a lot of time together and saying, hey, we don't want you making visits anywhere else, dude. Like you're a Buckeye, get in the boat.
Yeah, I think he was just at Missouri. And maybe I am overreacting, but after I watched that very short basketball clip, like he kind of catapulted up to maybe number one on my personal wish list for the class. I know Bill Landis is a big fan of him, and that's good enough for me. Yeah, I mean, I think he's a guy you can't let get away. We mentioned Adam Guthrie. He's out already, but I think this is one you just have to win. I know Florida State, Missouri, I think Michigan's involved too. I have no idea if he's anywhere close to like shutting it down. So if people are expecting a commitment this weekend or this week, that might be wishful thinking. But yeah, I think people watched that highlight tape and they realized he's a 4-star everywhere, but I think some sites have him ranked outside of the top 20 like offensive tackles in the country. But then you watch that tape and you watch the footwork, and I mean, you had to come away impressed.
Yeah, he's really, really got an upside that is really impressive. What you see with Sam is someone that's just scraping the surface of what it means to be an offensive tackle. He played a lot early in his career, but dealt with some injuries and couldn't really get himself into a part where he started to look like the national recruit that he is. But now, boy, oh boy, he looks like a totally different guy. And I think what you brought up, is he ready to make a decision? I don't know. He's saying no. He's saying that he wants to take official visits, that he's going to be interested in letting this play out. But he also was saying in November, like he was ready to make a decision. And it certainly would have been Ohio State at that time. I don't know if maybe I don't know that he's the type of dude who's going to be prisoner of the moment, but the relationship with Tyler Bowen has grown really fast, really strong. And I think I'm not going to rule out the possibility of him making a decision in this spring, because I know Ohio State, when they want to, especially for in-state players, can also be fairly persuasive. But when he does commit, wherever it ends up being, wherever, we fully expect it will end up being to Ohio State at some point, don't pay too much attention to that national ranking at this point, because a lot of people just haven't seen all of the pieces of Sam Greer put together. And to your point, On3 has him as the number 12 ranked offensive tackle. 24/7 Sports has him as the 23rd ranked offensive tackle. ESPN has him as the number 35 ranked offensive tackle. And Rivals.com has him as the number 21 ranked offensive tackle. So he's sort of all over the map. But I'm going to tell you what, this is like, if you're Mick Marotti, if you're Tyler Bowen, and you're just building an offensive lineman in a lab and building an offensive tackle, like, that's what they look like. And Sam Greer cannot leave the state of Ohio. And I don't mean that Ohio State would be okay losing to Cincinnati or somewhere else. I mean, he has to be going to Ohio State, or without doubt. He is too much upside, too much potential for Ohio State to let him get away, especially considering how long they've been recruiting him. So could spend a lot more time talking about Sam Greer, but we won't, because there's a lot of other guys to discuss. As mentioned, Champ Smith from Vero Beach, Florida. He's in town already. He got into town on Sunday. Former high school teammate of Ohio State freshman linebacker TJ Alford. The relationship between Champ Smith and Ohio State's been really, really good. And I think if you're starting, if we're working from the goal of a 6-man offensive line class, if you had Max Riley, Sam Greer, and Champ Smith in that class by the end of spring, and then you got to just pick and choose the rest of the guys, I think you'd be really damn happy. And I think that's a real possibility for Ohio State. Again, not saying it's a guarantee, because of the fact that Sam continues to say he's wanting to get to official visits, but we'll see if that mood strikes. Max Riley wanted to wait until middle of April to make a decision and didn't. Champ Smith in town, big time guy there, 6'6", 290 pounds, freaky athlete. Deron Parks, who is at Cardinal Mooney High School in Sarasota, Florida. He moved from West Virginia. He's another guy. I think if Tyler Bowen on Monday says, Deron, you're our guy, we 100% come in, get in the class, I think you could see him pull the trigger in the near future. I think he's that interested in Ohio State. And Pete Egolitis from Bishop Watterson in Columbus might be, like, to me, and this is, again, I'm not an offensive line evaluator. I understand the way rankings work. I know how people react when people who don't get involved in rankings give their opinions, but I don't see any major difference from a purely prospect standpoint between Egolitis and Adam Guthrie at this point. So that's just my take.
Did I see most of his offers right now are like MAC schools, and then maybe there was like an Iowa State on there? Does that sound right?
He got 15 offers. Iowa State, of course, Kentucky, Missouri, Indiana has not offered, but they're on the list. He's been there a couple times. Yeah, I mean, it's the traditional. Everyone who plays football in Ohio gets an offer from these schools. Kentucky, Iowa State, Missouri starting to become one of those. Like, that's the way it works. But at 6'7", 280 pounds, like 275 pounds, like, he is, to me, at Bishop Watterson, he plays at a winning program. I think that there are offsetting attributes to make me go, like, if I had to choose between Adam Guthrie and Pete Egolitis, I'm not sure that it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other to me right now, because how long are they how much runway do they need to be an Ohio State caliber offensive lineman? And I think it's probably pretty much the same thing, like three years of college ball, but maybe I'm dead wrong.
Yeah. I mean, if it's going to be a 6 or 7 man offensive line class, I mean, you could do a lot worse than having somebody like that be one of your lower rated guys in the class, I guess. Real quick, we talked earlier about just the big national names offensive line wise, the Cantwells, the Ojos, and obviously the the Champ Smith now. Would you say, without a doubt, out of those like big national names, that Champ Smith is probably the most likely, at least at this point, to end up in the class?
I would say that's accurate. Yeah. I mean, the relationship there is the longest. I don't know. When you're talking about Jackson Cantwell and Felix Ojo, who are like consensus top 5 offensive tackles in the country, 5-star players, like they're going to be setting the market type of players. And I'm not sure that Champ Smith is in that discussion, but he's a really good player. And again, the long-term relationship with Ohio State, so very important there as well. Running back Favor Aki from Delaware, Rutherford B. Hayes High School in Delaware, Ohio, outside of Columbus. He's going to visit. And if I had like who's on offer watch on Monday, it's Favor Aki and Gordon Sellers, the wide receiver from North Carolina. Same high school, Providence Day High School that David Sanders attended. Ohio State going back there. Sellers is visiting tomorrow. He's one of those players that's really starting to creep up the national boards. 6'3", 175-pounder from Charlotte. I 100% expect Ohio State to offer him on Monday. I guess I'm not really making odds on if they offer Favor Aki, but I think that there's a conversation to be had there between Ryan Day and Favor Aki to see how Favor vibes with the program. I think the kid's really special as a human, and I think Ryan Day will see that when he gets a chance to sit down with him. And I wouldn't be surprised if you see Favor get an offer from Ohio State here in the near future. Were it solely up to Carlos Loughlin, I think he'd probably already have one. But when you deal with in-state players, Ohio State has to be a little bit different. And like almost every in-state offer has to be stamped and approved by Ryan Day. And for a good reason, because it's not like other positions where you can or other states where if you offer a kid, it doesn't really matter. When you're in the state of Ohio, you better have a plan for that player. And Ohio State really likes Favor Aki, and I think that they could offer him this week as well.
We went into detail on kind of the running back board a couple weeks ago when we talked, and it genuinely doesn't seem like Ohio State leads for Derek Cooper or Savion Hyder or any of those guys. So I mean, just my personal non-expert opinion, like I don't see why they wouldn't make an offer for a key, especially with Miami and other national schools pushing. So we'll see.
Yeah, I don't know if they don't lead with those guys, but certainly those are bigger battles. I think that Ohio State is right at the top for Derek Cooper. I think they're right at the top for Jonathan Hatton in Texas. I think that they're right in the mix with Savion Hyder and Carson Baker and Jay Lamar in Georgia. But to your point is correct. I mean, if you have Favor Aki in the state of Ohio and you like what he's done on the field and you think he's got the upside to continue getting better, again, in this new world, like you cannot sign 20 first-round picks. Like it's just not the way it works. So you got to sign a couple guys that you are going to need some time to develop them and hope that they are patient and willing to do so. Jalen Lott, the next wide receiver on this list, he's from Texas. His father played at Texas. He is more of a slot type of receiver, 5'11", 170-pound kid. Received crystal balls to Oregon on Sunday. I don't know if he was at Oregon prior to this or not, but he's heading into Columbus tonight and will visit Ohio State for the first time. Brian Hartline offered him just about 5 weeks ago. Really twitchy, electric player with the ball in his hands. So for both Gordon Sellers and Jalen Lott, I think you'll see Ohio State become a real contender here. I don't know why I've got balloons going in the background. I must have somehow inadvertently had the reactions on my camera. I don't know how that's possible because I have the reactions off on my camera, but it still went off. But maybe it wasn't. I don't know. It went off on my source camera, but I don't think it happened on the StreamYard.
I didn't see it. I don't think I did.
It was weird. Anyway, I had balloons over here and it was freaking me out. Anyway, like Ohio State moves the dial with wide receivers, and we know that. But it is also interesting that you are heading into this spring with only 5 commitments in the class of 2026, and 40% of your class is wide receivers, and Chris Henry and Jaden Ricketts out of Pataskala. So you're in a situation now for Brian Hartline where you have to start figuring out who that next guy is going to be. And we'll talk about a little bit later, but maybe we don't even need to. I think you also have to be at least somewhat prepared to say, well, if something happens with Chris Henry and he ends up somewhere else, then you got to have backup plans and you got to have other guys available. So similar to the way Ohio State recruited, who is the kid? He went to Florida State, Elijah.
It's like a common last name, Elijah
Moore.
Moore. There you go. Yeah.
Ohio State was recruiting the hell out of Elijah Moore in the 2023 class because he was the poor man's version of Jeremiah Smith. And Ohio State thought they were going to get them both. And then Florida State was like, hey, if you're going to compare this guy to Jeremiah Smith, maybe we'll just take him since we can't get JJ. So you're going to see names pop up, but I don't know necessarily if Brian Hartline at this point has a real pecking order for the wide receivers in the class of 2026 because he's still getting to know them all. I mean, a lot of these guys have not really been on campus. Sellers has never been to campus. Jalen Lott's never been on campus. Jabari Mack down there in Louisiana. I think he's Ohio State, Texas A&M are some of the favorites. You're going to see that wide receiver board really take shape over these next couple of weeks. And then you've got the other guys like Brody Keefe, who's been on campus a dozen times from North Carolina. But Hartline is in a unique position right now because he already has two of those three guys locked up. And I don't think they're going to be interested in taking four in this class, barring some unexpected attrition. You have a comment?
Yeah. And I saw the other Matter Day receiver who's Henry's teammate was.
Caden Dixon-Wyatt, right?
Yeah, I think I saw today that he said that Oregon leads. I don't know. I know he's visiting at some point, but I saw that. He's a name we've talked about in the past too, I think.
Yeah, Caden Dixon-Wyatt, very high on Ohio State's list, a teammate of Chris Henry at Mater Dei High School in California. But yes, Oregon leads for everybody. Welcome to 2025. Everyone's going to Oregon. Moving on to the defense, we've got Jake Krull, a defensive end from the IMG Academy down in Florida. Kind of a old school Ohio State defensive end, 6'5", 245 pounds, just a kind of a meathead. I like players like this. He reminds me of like a Mike Kudla or someone like that from the old days. A big time player though. He's got a lot of upside. Late addition to the visitor list for Monday is Storm Miller, who going back to Ohio State Clemson battles. That's going to be an Ohio State Clemson battle for the Strongsville linebacker. I think that Storm Miller is one of those guys that we probably don't talk about enough because Ohio State has been moving somewhat slow in this recruiting class, but Storm is certainly a guy at linebacker that is still worth real attention being paid to. And Jordan Thomas, who is a cornerback / safety from New Jersey, he will visit on Monday. He's like right there at the top of the list for Ohio State as far as the secondary, who they're on the top of their wish list. Right next to like Elbert Hill and Jacob Weatherspoon and even Braylon Womack and Blaine Bradford. Like Jordan Thomas is very high on the list for Ohio State. So if you're talking about who maybe looking throughout this entire week, and I only have the key visitors for Monday and Wednesday on the screen, but as far as defenders go, I think Jordan Thomas might be the most important one that's visiting this week. He's that vital for Ohio State.
Who'd you say is who else is in it with him? I've only known his name because I've seen it mentioned. It might have been like Notre Dame or somebody.
Michigan, Notre Dame. There's always everyone's involved because that's the way the world is now. I'm sure Oregon will get involved. Alabama. He's a guy that's probably Penn State. I think there's probably like Miami, but you never know. But really, he's not a kid that talks a lot about his recruitment, but I do know that Ohio State values him extremely highly. And Penn State, Texas A&M, Syracuse, USC, Auburn, like a lot of schools are getting involved that are the ones where you're like, I don't like when that team's involved because it turns into a NIL conversation. But he's a kid from Bergen Catholic in New Jersey. It's a place the Buckeyes have done very well. They love him. He is like at the top of the list for Ohio State when it comes to defensive players in the class. So pretty important there. I only have one 2027 prospect listed on these key visitors for Monday and Wednesday. and that is tight end Brock Williams from Illinois, who I think is like a borderline 5-star type tight end prospect in the class of 2027. He loves Keenan Bailey. Keenan Bailey loves him. Buckeyes are looking to take 2 tight ends in the class of 2027. And between Brock Williams and D'Angelo White at Cleveland Villa Angelo St. Joseph, I think that you could see Keenan Bailey really dial in and zeroed in on those 2 guys by summer, to the point where we may not even be looking beyond them for the class of 2027. That important already for the Buckeyes. As you look at Monday, Andrew, what are your thoughts?
Sorry, did you say Monday?
Monday.
So I know I was going to say Keenan Bailey, when he like locks in on somebody, that's usually a pretty big deal. I guess the biggest thing I'm watching for on Monday, obviously I won't like be there or anything, but it's just the offer watch. You know, does Favor Akey get the offer? Does Iglitis get an offer? I don't even know if I said that right.
I don't know. It sounds like a disease, but like it's also a disease. You're like, I don't mind. I've got Iglitis. And you're like, it's not debilitating. I just got a small case of Iglitis and I'll be fine. I can still go to work. And ultimately, I don't even know I had it until it showed up in the blood screen.
Yeah, it does sound a little concerning, I guess. But just seeing if those guys get offered. Obviously, I'd love to see a surprise, like a Sam Greer pop or something like that. And then Jordan Thomas, getting him on campus is big. I like corners that are over 6 foot. I'm a huge Elbert Hill fan, but he's a bit on the smaller side, I guess. And then I don't know if we want to move ahead to Wednesday, but Bo Bentley's kind of a big name that I'm looking at because nobody knows what the heck's going on at quarterback. I know he was just at LSU. Oklahoma's involved. All the SEC seems to be looking at him. So yeah,
it's Bo Bentley is at the top of the list for Wednesday's off visits, and I think it has to start there because the quarterback is so important to the class every year. But as you mentioned, it's now March 16th, and Ohio State does not have any clear-cut real priority at the position in the class of 2026. As we talked about a few weeks ago, I think this position now is becoming much more important in this cycle than it was 6 months ago, as far as like making sure you have a guy that is not just a body, but someone who has the upside and potential to be a player for you down the road. Bo Bentley is one of them. He seems very wide open in his process. And similar to how things are with like the wide receivers and Gordon Sellers and Jalen Mott, I think when Ohio State really like puts on the charm when it comes to a quarterback, like they get who they want. And I'm interested to see if Bo Bentley can impress Billy Fessler and Ryan Day and the Buckeyes offensive brain trust enough to move into that window of conversation. Because again, it's Oklahoma, it's Texas or it's LSU, because Texas has a quarterback committed, Texas A&M has a quarterback committed, Houston has a quarterback committed. So like it's kind of a wide open race there for Bo Bentley, and I think you can really make some headway if you're Ohio State with him. I have 2 offensive linemen listed for Wednesday that I think are worth watching. Aaron Thomas from Phoenix. His father played at Florida State, won a national championship for the Seminoles. He's a player that Ohio State's talked to every day since he was offered a little bit about 6 weeks ago. He's going to visit on the 19th. Oliver Miller is from Colorado. We've seen Tyler Bowen be willing to go pretty much anywhere to look for these next wave of Ohio State offensive linemen. And Miller is a 6'6", 285-pounder from Inglewood, Cherry Creek High School. And then there's Luke Wafel, who is the brother of, I think, Owen Wafel. Where's he at now? Is he at Penn State? He went to Michigan, transferred out. Maybe, I don't think he's at Penn State. Where's he at?
He's showing up as Penn State on.
Yeah, he's at Penn State. So Luke Wafel is a different type of player. Owen was more of an inside guy, defensive tackle. Luke has the potential to be more of an edge rusher, similar in a lot of ways to Jake Kruel in the style of play, and kind of that the strong side edge rusher that Ohio State's looking for, someone that can be a run stopper. So he's an interesting guy to watch. And then if we're really on like commitment watch for someone this week, I think CJ Santa, the linebacker from Olentangy, the teammate of Caden Gephardt, would be at the top of that list for me. I think that he's certainly one that could end up making a decision sooner than later. Ohio State is still very much involved. I love his athleticism. I think he is an underrated player nationally. I've said it before, but he reminds me of the Brian Betcher, the linebacker at Oregon. Very, very twitchy, sideline to sideline, physical, everything you want in a linebacker. I think CJ Santa has the potential to be that guy.
Let me ask you, with linebacker recruiting, do you think one of these guys is going to get left out? And I know they're looking at Tyler Atkinson, Georgia kid, who's like maybe the best player in the country. But I guess just speaking of CJ Santa, Storm Miller, and then like Sincere Johnson. And then you have what's his face, the Crowell or whatever, the safety linebacker hybrid type. Like, I mean, I feel like something's going to have to give there, but maybe I'm wrong.
I think that you take the first three that want to commit. I think with Simeon Caldwell, I think you still view him right now as a safety. Maybe you don't recruit him exactly as a safety. Maybe you're telling other kids, hey, we're not sure where he's going to end up. He's an athlete. But I think between Storm Miller, CJ Santa, Sincere Johnson, I think you take all three of those guys. And then you swing for the fences with Tyler Atkinson if you add a fourth, because Tyler Atkinson is so different and so much better than anybody else in the country. You could never say no to him. So I don't think that it really ultimately matters. He's sort of Caleb Downs, Jeremiah Smith type. Like, if he wants in, you just make room and you do whatever you have to. Now, if Tyler Atkinson in November was like, hey, I'm committing to Ohio State, does it impact Sincere Johnson or CJ Santa or Storm Miller at the time? Not unless it impacts them personally, because Ohio State wouldn't kick those kids out of the class or anything like that. So they would have to make some decisions based on their own comfort. But I know for a fact that James Laurinaitis is telling all those kids there's room for them, and he's recruiting the heck out of Tyler Atkinson and other players. I mean, still at linebacker, Xavier Griffin down there in Georgia, who visited Ohio State last year for the spring game, committed to USC. I think Ohio State will be in line probably to get an official visit from Xavier Gibson this summer. I don't know if he's going to make a spring visit or not, but he's in the conversation as well. He's a 5-star type. So there's always it's Ohio State. They're always going to go after the best players in the country. But it goes back to what I was talking about with Favor Aki and Ryan Day and Ohio State offering in-state players. You have 3 in-state linebackers offered. All of them could commit to Ohio State and will be more than willing to be brought into the class, regardless of what happens with Tyler Atkinson or Xavier Griffin or something. That's that. Let us, if we can, Andrew, talk a little bit about Chris Henry, Ohio State's 5-star wide receiver commitment, who was once again at Oregon over the weekend. He's going to be at Ohio State April 5th. So preface any concern with that. We talked about Chris Henry on the last time we did this show, which is the same thing. Like, how worried are you? How worried are you? I feel like we're on the verge of becoming everything we hate. I can't stand to see the continued using. I'm so sick of every time Chris Henry goes to the bathroom, somebody posts a graphic about it. And yet here we are talking about it. But I feel like our job, or my job, is to say, don't worry right now. Like, it's irrelevant to get worried right now. Chris Henry is going to be committed to Ohio State until Brian Hartline or Ryan Day is not at Ohio State. And there's going to be a ton of talk about other schools, mostly Oregon, but USC spending a lot of money right now as well. Again, I've heard that Oregon is already trying to figure out monthly stipends and that sort of stuff to get the pocketbook already open for Chris Henry. But again, in a world without rules, I don't know. I mean, Ohio State's just counting on the relationship that he has with Brian Hartline and Ryan Day. Chris Henry will be in town on April 5th. And I think the best thing about what he's doing is when he makes these visits, Chris Henry is always saying the right things afterwards. Always. And he's been committed to Ohio State for almost 2 years at this point. And I don't think he's saying those things just to say them. I think he's saying those things, the right things, because that's truly how he feels. And we live in a recruiting world / news market where we almost like want to accuse everyone of being a liar all the time, and or to suggest that, oh, he's only saying this because he's trying to manage egos or manage fan reaction. And I don't think that's the case. I think Chris Henry is saying exactly what he thinks, which is, I like other schools, but as long as Brian Hartline and Ryan Day are at Ohio State, that's where I'm going to be. And I think as long as that's the case, as long as he keeps saying that, which is what Jeremiah Smith did, then I think that everything's going to be fine.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. My level of concern is minimal, barring something unforeseen with the Ohio State coaching staff. But we're going to continue talking about him every time he visits Oregon or USC or maybe Texas. I don't know.
I'm sure Alabama, Miami, like everyone's gonna get a turn.
Yeah, I mean he's going to make the trips across the country, and I think Brian Hartline is fine with it because he knows he has such a great relationship with him, and I think the fan base just needs to trust Ohio State's wide receiver coach / offensive coordinator, who is the best recruiter in America. So
and there's no point in really talking much more about it until something happens, whether he actually changes what he's saying, or Brian Hartline leaves, or Ryan Day decides to retire in the middle of the season, whatever, then we can have a different conversation. But as long as Chris Henry is saying what he's saying, and as long as Brian Hartline and Ryan Day are at Ohio State, I think we can stop talking about this until signing day. And that's my commitment to you, America. Not going to talk about it anymore. We are going to talk a lot about Elbert Hill, though. Oh, boy. Again, we talked about Elbert Hill on our last episode, and since then, as we see on the screen, Hayes Fawcett, Elbert Hill's locked in his official visits. He's visiting LSU, USC, Oregon, and Alabama. Not on the list, Ohio State. Not on the list, Michigan. I am confident Ohio State will still have Elbert Hill on campus for an official visit at some point. I am confident he will still be on campus at least once this spring. I am confident that Ohio State continues to be very much in the mix for Elbert Hill. But I am also confident that we have barely begun to see where the shenanigans of this recruitment go, because it sure is taking on a life that I didn't expect it to when Elbert Hill started to become a national name about a year ago.
Yeah, I think when Ohio State fans saw that tweet, and I'm guilty of this too, like the immediate reaction was like almost we saw that tweet and read it as like Elbert Hill is now down to these 4 schools, when that's not at all what it says. I think you'd be foolish to even begin to think that he's not going to get back to Ohio State. I'm sure he'll make an official visit to Ohio State. But at the same time, you're also probably foolish if you're just brushing Oregon to the side and acting like this is already a done deal, because it's not. So both of those things are true, I think.
I think of the group that you see on the screen, USC, LSU, Oregon, Alabama, I think the last 2 are the most concerning. Oregon and Alabama, I think, are very real. I know USC is becoming extremely aggressive with their recruiting, and I think that's awesome. The more good teams, the better in the Big Ten. I think that it's going to be a good thing long-term for the Buckeyes to have a very aggressive USC at play. But Tim Walton, here's what I know about Tim Walton. He is not going to play this game with Elbert Hill. So if Ohio State starts to feel like Elbert is giving them the runaround, or that he's not telling them the truth, or that he's not really interested in them, Ohio State will move on. And until at this point, they've not done that. And I know that very concept, right, probably like annoys people to say that the number 1 cornerback in the country, according to some rankings, is in Ohio, and the Buckeyes could just be comfortable moving on and saying, okay, go ahead, enjoy Oregon, enjoy Alabama, wherever. But they certainly could do that, but they're not doing that. And so until that happens, I think that people should walk cautiously when it comes to Oregon and USC, but not dive so far into the panic end of the deep of the pool where you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe he's not going to Ohio State. Every single thing that happens right now on the recruiting front is designed to garner clicks and to generate revenue and to improve NIL situation for these players. And it sucks, but that's the way it is. And this tweet regarding Elbert Hill's official visits it's not misleading. It's not like it's intentionally leaving Ohio State off. This is just what's happening. And Elbert Hill, similar to what a lot of players in the last few years have done, and now we're just seeing it, I think, even more so than ever, is the minute that you're a kid in the state of Ohio and you talk about Ohio State, other schools stop recruiting you. And I think that the more buzz you can generate for other schools, the better your recruiting profile is going to be, and the more clicks you're going to generate for the networks that are counting on that. So that's all I want to say about Elbert Hill. I'm not going to put a kibosh on discussion about him like I am for Chris Henry, because his recruitment is obviously very fluid, and I think that it's real. I think Oregon and Alabama especially, and then USC a little bit below them, are very concerning when it comes to this cycle for Ohio State. But I don't think that it's worth people lamenting too loudly at this point. So let's move to the 4-minute offense and wrap this up. Any other thoughts on Elbert Hill before we do that?
Not really. I mean, the kid grew up rooting for Ohio State. He lives like an hour and 45 minutes from campus or something. So, I mean, I'm not, my worry on this one isn't, maybe it's a little higher than the Chris Henry level of worry, but it's still not terribly high. So,
and it's not a similar situation to the Adam Guthrie or Caden Gephardt, where Ohio State was not prioritizing, like
right.
They are 100% prioritizing Elbert Hill. So let's wrap it up. 4-minute offense. What else you got, Andrew? What do you want to talk about?
So in honor of the 4-minute offense, I'm not going to do in or out now because we got too many visits coming up. There's just too much going on. So who do you think are going to be the next 4 offers in the state of Ohio in the 2026 class?
Offers in the state of Ohio? That's an interesting question. Again, I think Favor Aki is certainly likely to be one. I think that there's a world where Jamarcus Weiss, who's a defensive tackle from Trotwood Madison, could be offered by Ohio State if he's patient. If Matt Ponatoski decides that he wants to play football, I think he's someone who could very easily get an offer from Ohio State. I really like Landon Myrie, a tight end out of Cincinnati Princeton. I think that he or PJ McFarland or Braden Fogel, the tight end at Lexington, all 3 of those guys are in the conversation for an offer. If the Buckeyes decide to take a second tight end in the class of 2026, and since they are hosting official visitors from around the country, like Max Sutter in June, I think that there's at least a real conversation that they're having about taking 2. And if that's the case, Myrie or McFarland or Fogel, one of those 3 is very, very realistic. And pardon me, I think probably. I mean, I'm just looking down the list here. I think probably Aglitis is probably one. I think he's a real guy down the road. Or Landry Breed at Mentor, who's another really good offensive tackle prospect in high school, who will be an interior guy at college level. He will visit Ohio State next Monday. I know he's had a really good relationship going with Tyler Bowen. So one of those other offensive linemen in the state, I really think that there are a couple offensive linemen that are worth talking about. Eli Sanchez at Sandusky Perkins High School. I love his game. Like, he's a filthy, nasty, punch you in the mouth type of offensive guard. And I think you can never have enough of those guys. He's ranked a little bit higher than Breed, according to most people. One of those guys. I also really like Justin Hodge, a wide receiver at Mentor, who is probably a touch too slow right now to be an Ohio State level wide receiver, but he does a lot of really nice things. And I could see him camping and blowing up if he's put in the time to get faster from last summer to now, which I don't know if he has or not.
Cool. I asked you for 4 names and you gave me about 14. So that's proof that we don't prepare for the 4-minute offense in advance. We don't rehearse this. So I appreciate it. That's really all I have. I guess somebody's going to ask you about commitment watch, but I mean, CJ Sana is probably the big one, I guess. And we talked about him earlier.
Yeah. I mean, Sana's one, Champ Smith, Greer, like they're going to try to make some headway, but I don't know that you should expect those guys to commit this early. Sana feels like a different scenario because of what you mentioned earlier when it comes to Sincere Johnson, when it comes to Storm Miller, and then the rush for either Atkinson or Xavier Griffin or someone like that. I think CJ Sana would be wise to lock in his spot at Ohio State when his official visits elsewhere are Michigan State, Wisconsin, et cetera. Like I don't think he's not in the position that Storm Miller's in when it comes to Clemson or what Sincere Johnson's in. Right. So yeah. I don't think he has that as much as some of the other guys. And not that he cares about that, not that he's thinking about that necessarily, but if he went home and laid down and stared at his ceiling and thought, okay, how should this play out? I think he might have that conversation with himself. So, that's it for me. That's it for you. Yep. We are an hour and a half away from Selection Sunday on CBS Sports. As Ohio State waits its fate in the NCAA tournament pool. They will not make it. Newsflash. If they do, it's a mistake, and they should not be in the NCAA tournament. I'll still root for them if they make it, but they're not gonna. So don't worry about it. Hopefully next year we'll have this conversation on Selection Sunday, and it'll be a different story. But man, what a disappointing last couple of weeks to the season for the Buckeye basketball team. But that's why we don't talk about basketball on the podcast really often, because it's so frustrating. Anyway. He's Andrew Ellis. I'm Jeremy Birmingham. We really appreciate you watching Talking Stuff on the podcast. Please rate, review, subscribe on your podcast platform of choice. And if you're watching this on YouTube, subscribe. Hit the little bell so you get notifications when there's new podcast stuff to watch. And we'll see you on Monday morning for the podcast daily with myself, Austin, and Bill. Until then, have a good night and goodbye.